'Twas Christmas night some years ago. Santa Claus had done his part, bringing gifts to all the good little children of the world, and they rejoiced upon finding their rewards waiting for them under twinkling trees. All around there was joy. Merriment and mirth filled the air. It was indeed a magical day which only comes once a year. Now, playtime was over. Now it was Krampus's turn. For you see, for as many good children there are in the world, there are just as many naughty little boys and girls, and it was up to Krampus to set them straight. It was a year like any other, and Krampus stood on the outskirts of a small town, stretching and prepping himself to do what he did best. Gripping the golden chain he carried around his body, he tugged at the links, testing their endurance. He ran a black claw down each one, inspecting carefully.
"Ah, damn it," he growled to himself. "These will need replacing soon."
He and his chains had been working extra hard these past few years. While powerful enough to still do their job, they were heavily worked now. For the first time in centuries, he would need Santa Claus to send a few of his elves to fix them up.
Elves, Krampus cringed. Such vile little things.
Upon entering the small town, he could already feel the fear of the naughty children who had lumps of coal waiting for them under the tree. They should be afraid. Everything about Krampus showed them he was not someone anyone wanted coming for a visit. Santa left several lumps of coal around here. Krampus knew he had his work cut out for him in this place, and he could see nearly every house in the town had been marked with coal. Krampus stretched his tired muscles. It had been a long night already, and he wasn't even close to being done. Every year there seemed to be more and more children to beat and steal. The sack on his back of children he had taken that night was becoming too heavy for him to carry, nearly to the point he thought he would have to make a stop in his domain to empty it out. Krampus began stomping and drudging his way to the first house, the first of many. Stopping outside the front door, he dropped the burlap sack and began to bounce from one foot to the other. When he was ready, he clapped his clawed hands and swung the sack upon his shoulders, securing it around his torso. The door of the house opened with the touch of his hand. No lock could stop Krampus. Only his brother was foolish enough to go down the chimney. A vision of Santa Claus appeared in his mind as he skulked his way through the house. He was probably passed out drunk by now. Say what you will about Santa and his elves, but they knew how to have a good time. Pfft, Krampus huffed. He always had to miss the festivities on Christmas. Sure, the elves threw an absolute rager on Christmas Eve after Santa departed, but those creatures were just creepy. With so few children believing in Santa Claus, and even fewer children being good these days, those evil things couldn't keep their hands busy enough. Krampus felt a chill as he recalled being dog-piled by a mob of them, wondering how many of them it would take to bring him down. He remembered well, their little hands getting everywhere, and the giggling was the stuff of nightmares. Up the stairs he dragged himself, tossing his chains to add to the menacing effect of his presence. He always did like the theatrics of this job. Already he could feel the fear of his target growing. The little boy had nowhere to run. The coal mark of his target grew its brightest as Krampus stood in front of the bedroom door. Twirling his chains around his claws and rolling his shoulders, Krampus readied himself to teach another bad child why it's so important to be good. The door creaked as it opened to Krampus's touch. Good, he thought to himself. The little sounds of the hunter moving in on the prey bruise more fear than the hunter alone. Krampus could see the little child laying in bed with the covers over his head, a typical maneuver for the children he visits. If they can't see him, he can't see them. A child's logic. The boy was breathing heavily, as expected. No one likes getting lessons from Krampus. He found it hard to believe these methods still manufactured so much fear after all these years. Following the usual procedure, Krampus dropped his chains to the floor, letting them drag as he skulked nearer to the bed. He used to love this part the most, the moments before he brought his target face to face with him and delivered his harsh lessons. Now he did it with little thought. This method was getting boring, and if he was only going to get busier each year, it couldn't hurt to try something new. Think about it later, he told himself, as he revealed his great fangs. Regardless of how dull this was getting, he did have a job to do. Krampus bent over the bed, leaning in close so the boy's face was only inches away from his own. Using a single claw, he reached the edge of the blanket above the boy's head and began to slowly pull it down. The boy beneath the blanket started to tremble, making Krampus smile. The fear was delicious, and all a part of the process. With a great tug, Krampus jerked back the blanket and roared at the boy. The child let out a shriek, as they usually did. Then something happened which never happened before. From below the covers, the boy pulled out a pistol and aimed it at Krampus. Shocked by the sudden defense, Krampus jumped back with a yell, frightening the boy further. With another screech, the boy closed his eyes tight and fired the pistol at Krampus, narrowly missing, with the bullet hitting the wall. Krampus was further surprised to hear from down the hall the sound of thundering footsteps. Within seconds, the bedroom door burst open and a large man with the double-barrel shotgun stood before Krampus, ready to fire. "Who the hell are you? What are you doing to Timmy?" Krampus had no words, frozen in shock. Timmy continued screaming and the large man cocked the shotgun. Fearing for his life, Krampus did the only thing he could do. He unraveled his chains and moved to strike the large man. It all happened in the blink of an eye. Krampus brought down his mighty chains upon the man, only for the weak links to shatter upon impact. The man was only stunned long enough for Krampus to jump through the window, shattering the glass and diving into the cold night. As his feet hit the ground of the main road in the small town, Krampus could hear the man shouting from inside the house. For a moment, Krampus mourned the loss of his chains, yet knew he couldn't be distracted. He had to get out of there now. Up above, the man came to the broken window and looked down at Krampus, taking aim once again. Krampus moved off to run, fearing for his life. Up the road he dashed as the man fired the shotgun, sending a sound of thunder throughout the small town. Krampus didn't know where he was running, yet he could see the coal marks moving in. Soon he stumbled onto a square where the townfolk had gathered, all pointing their guns at him. Krampus froze. "You again, you son of a bitch!" said one of the men in town. "I've got a bone to pick with you!" Krampus looked closely at the man in question and could see some scars from a previous visit. Krampus had visited this man when he was a child. "Me too!" said a woman with a pistol aimed at him, yet another previous victim. "You're dead, you bastard!" shouted an unseen man from the mob. The others cheered in unison, united by their hatred. Krampus stepped back, only to find himself surrounded and defenseless. These people didn't fear him anymore. Worse, they had grudges to settle. "This is it," Krampus thought. "This is how I die." "Hold on, folks," came a quiet yet demanding voice from the mob. An older man stepped forth between Krampus and the gun-wielding rioters. The people in the crowd lowered their weapons. "Not again, Boris!" cried out a voice in protest. Now, the old man answered. "We do things right around here. Let's give this horrible creature a chance to defend his actions." Boris, the old man, turned to Krampus. "We know who you are," he whispered. "You can see, most of us have a grudge against you." Looking around the group, Krampus recognized the injuries he left on many of these adults when they were children. "So, that's what this is about," he said out loud. Boris nodded. "I'll make sure you get a chance to defend yourself. It's only fair." Krampus looked Boris up and down and didn't detect any magical scar left by him from his early years of life. He was a good child growing up. Thinking quickly, Krampus asked Boris for one thing. "I'd like to write a letter if that's okay." Krampus knew there was no way of getting out of this all on his own. He was going to need help, and there was only one person who could save him. Boris blinked at such an odd request. "A letter?" He ran a hand down his beard. "I suppose that's okay." Looking at the crowd, he shouted, "Paper and pen, please! Our captive monster has made a request." The crowd groaned, but soon a paper and pen were produced. Krampus was herded over to the town center where a fountain stood, frozen in the winter weather. Here he sat and quickly scribbled a letter to Santa Claus. "Brother, I'm in some serious trouble over here. This mob of angry town folk are about to skin me alive. All of them are children I visited years ago. They all want a piece of me. Get me out of here now!" Carefully, Krampus folded the paper with his claws into the shape of an airplane. As he stood, the townfolk brought up their guns again, ready to take him down. Krampus looked to the starry night sky and threw the paper plane into the night. Off it went at the speed of light, disappearing like a comet into the night. It was his only chance, and he had hoped for his own sake his brother wasn't a drunken mess. For a moment, the townfolk watched in wonder as the paper plane vanished from sight. This creature was magical after all. Magical, yet at their mercy. Surrendering to his fate, at least for now, Krampus raised up his massive hands to the crowd. Despite his size, standing head and shoulders over the biggest person in town, he was no match for their weapons, especially against such a large mob. Boris moved up to him and placed a hand on his arm, gently coaxing him to the front of the crowd. "Time to plead your case, Krampus," Boris told him. "Tell us why we should let you go." Krampus slumped his shoulders. All his existence, he never understood why he had to do what he did each Christmas night. Perhaps this was his answer. "Look," Krampus said, addressing the mob. "This has always been my job. Back in the day, all it took was the threat of me to stop children from being naughty. Children were so good back then." Krampus hung his head. "Why is this my job? It should be your job," he said, gesturing to the crowd. "To raise your children right, to teach them how to be good." At this, the crowd looked at one another. "If you had done your job and raised your kids right, I'd be the one at the North Pole getting fatter and fatter each year. Instead, I visit more houses than my brother." Krampus then looked up at the crowd with a sad look in his eye. "Let this be my lesson tonight. Please, be good, and I never have to darken your homes. I will never have to leave scars. You will never have to see me. I would become a myth." The people in the crowd lowered their weapons as they pondered Krampus's words. Maybe he had a point after all. Perhaps they had failed as parents, like their parents before them. They had to be the guiding lights for their own children, not leave them in darkness. There were monsters in the dark, like Krampus. "Screw that shit!" shouted a voice from the crowd. One by one, there were outcries of agreement. Who was Krampus to decide how they should live their lives? Who was Santa Claus to decide who was good and who was bad? "Drag him to the stake!" a woman yelled from the crowd. "Stake?" Krampus asked Boris. Boris only nodded. "Sorry, Krampus. Mob rules." No sooner did Boris speak the words did Krampus find himself being dragged to the end of the square, where a stake had been set up, surrounded by firewood. They were going to burn him alive! For the first time in his existence, Krampus truly felt helpless, and he truly felt fear. "So, this is what it was like," he thought to himself. From behind, a townsman tore off his sack filled with captured children, and Krampus felt his arms being pulled to his back. The townspeople soon had him tied tightly to the stake. Krampus's power to unlock any door wouldn't help him with knots. He was stuck here. "Burn him! Burn him! Burn him!" chanted the crowd. Two townspeople came with torches ready to set the firewood alight and slowly torture Krampus for what they considered his own sins. This creature captured and beat children for centuries. The time of his tyranny was over. "Ho, ho, ho!" The sound of a very familiar laugh was heard above the ruckus of the mob, silencing their malicious clamor, halting their steps in disbelief. Up above there came a jingling of bells. A sleigh streaked across the sky like a shooting star, led by 8 reindeer. Around the town it flew, lowering itself more and more each round, until it finally landed in the square. Out stepped Santa Claus in a tracksuit of red and white, with a nearly empty whiskey bottle in one hand, and his cheeks flushed red. "Well now," he said, his voice booming over the crowd, "what seems to be the problem here?" The crowd backed away, feeling suddenly judged. Santa Claus turned to Krampus. "What are you doing to my dear brother?" Santa Claus asked the crowd. One woman answered. "We were protecting ourselves from him. He was going to hurt our children." "Ho, ho, ho, ho!" Santa laughed in response. "Looks like there are more naughty adults here than children." With a smile, Santa Claus waddled over to the back of his sleigh. From the back of the sleigh, Santa brought out his magic pack, usually filled with toys for the good children of the world. "Let's see what I have for you in here." Santa Claus opened the pack. The townsfolk leaned in closer, unable to see into the recesses of the magical pack. From inside came what sounded like a giggle, then another, then the sound of smaller jingling bells than the ones on Santa's sleigh. Disarmed by their own curiosities, the people moved in closer. As the first person moved near the sleigh, it happened. From out of the sack came a mob of elves, pumped up from their raging party. Like a busted pipe, thousands of elves toppled the townsfolk, who screamed and begged for mercy as the little elves smothered their faces. This was going to be even more fun than their parties back at the North Pole. While the elves went about taking down the citizens of the small town, Santa moved to Krampus, freeing him from the stake. Together the two brothers leapt into the sleigh, and Santa gave the call for the reindeer to take off. "Give 'em hell, boys!" Santa shouted to the elves, dropping the pack for them to use to return to the North Pole once the job was done. One of the senior elves saluted Santa and Krampus as they took off into the night sky, before climbing up the fountain and letting out a high-pitched battle cry. The town slowly disappeared from view as Krampus and Santa flew into the night sky and back to the North Pole. Krampus slumped as far down as he could in the sleigh and shivered from seeing the elves do to the townfolk what they had done to him before. They truly were horrible little things of evil. Not to mention the awful embarrassment he felt asking his brother for a rescue.
"Thank goodness I got your letter,"
Santa shouted over the rushing wind.
"Care to explain what happened?"
Krampus shut his eyes and shook his head.
I don't want to talk about it.